Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Matchday 1 latest draft. And the biggest thing and the biggest updates that we've gotten so far for Euro Fantasy 2024 is a couple updates from managers, right? Squad selections have been thinned down. England, for example, have not called up Maguire. That probably means that Mark Guehi's going to come into this English squad and play as the left centre back. So I'm sort of taking a punt on that. As far as other areas in the pitch where you've seen some pretty significant news, we got confirmation from Tedesco, Belgium's national team manager, that effectively Casteels will be the number one. Koeman has confirmed that Verbruggen is the respective number one goalkeeper for the Netherlands. So if you're interested in that sort of news, stay tuned. Obviously, we will give you guys updates over the course of the next few videos. But for me, those are the biggest updates to just share before even talking about my Matchday 1 latest draft. For me, myself, my draft, I think the biggest thing that's changed actually is my chip strategy. I did a chip strategy video. You can either go for, as I said, option number one, in my opinion, which is just to target the entire group stages with, effectively a free hit, using the wild card in Matchday 1, using the wild card in Matchday 2, and limitless Matchday 3, or vice versa. Basically using a free hit for the entire group stage, as I said. Or you can go for the strategy where most likely you're going to limitless Matchday 3, and then you're going to consider using the wild card on Matchday 5 instead. So instead of, let's say, targeting the group stages that hard on singular fixtures, you are looking at teams that have really good fixtures on Matchday 1 and 2 as a pair. And I think the easy way to go about this, obviously, is we've got some incredibly strong teams within the tournament. England, Portugal, Belgium, Germany, I think, have really good group stage games over the course of the tournament because their groups are quite nice. For a team like, let's say, France, a very, very strong team, probably the second favorites of the tournament, you could argue, of course, Matchday 2 isn't a great game. There's the Netherlands game. For a team like Spain, for example, the way the groups are laid out, their easiest fixture, unfortunately, is on Matchday 3. So something to think about there based on your chip strategy. Another sort of part of that too, and why I've shifted towards the strategies, I just think that we have a lot more comfort over some of the teams that are not, for example, the major contenders of this tournament, but obviously I would say are teams that are definitely stronger than, let's say, the bottom half of the teams, right? So your mid-table effective teams for this European Championships. And I do think Ukraine and Switzerland fall into this bracket. When you look at the fixtures for Ukraine and Switzerland in specific, those two teams, in my opinion, are the ones to target to fill out a sort of chip strategy and Matchday 1 draft that sort of allows you to save the wild card for the knockout stages of the tournament. And that's sort of my chip strategy, and that's the change. Just wanted to give you guys an update before we jumped into the draft and explain some of our selections. Another thing that's very worth pointing out is that based on more information that we're going to get better predictions as well. We have been using 11ify, our great friend's website, and his sort of predictions. He's shown team predictions, goal predictions, clean sheet predictions, and even player, for example, involvement predictions as well. So feel free to check out his website to have a look at those numbers and see how that fits into your own chip strategy. Keep in mind, of course, goals and assists are not the only way you can score points in Euro Fantasy 2024. Players can get points from ball recoveries and man of the match, and that will obviously be a little bit different to just purely goal scoring. So something to point out, and let's just get ahead into our draft. Starting from the defense, as I said, I am taking advantage of Maguire's absence, an unfortunate sort of exclusion from the English squad, and I'm going to take Mark Guehi here. Part of the reason why I wanted to do this is because when you look at, for example, I think England and where they rank up against the teams, I think that England are the best defensive team in Europe. And so I do think that it does make sense to probably go double England defense. And part of that too is because I think a good point that's been made even when I was discussing with people is that ultimately between the English midfielders, maybe with the exception to Bellingham, who's likely to play more minutes, you will probably see a little bit more rotation, right? The English squad is extremely deep. The only player I think when it comes to attacking positions who's perma-nailed basically for Matchdays 1 and Matchday 2 for effectively 180 minutes is probably going to be Harry Kane, if we're being honest. And someone like Saka or Foden could effectively be an earlier sub. In my opinion, I think Saka is very likely to play more minutes than Foden, but that's obviously just a prediction. I'm just talking about, my sort of valuation on Saka and his impact on the team and what we can expect. As far as obviously other players, when we talk about the premiums, players like De Bruyne, Fernandes, and Ronaldo are very likely to play really consistent minutes as well. And they're probably also going to be good value for money too. So I think for people actually looking at players outside of the English midfielders, that's where you can spend your money effectively. And going back to the point with the defense, that's why I've actually chosen to go double English defense, right? I also have Pickford within my team. And the reason why I'm doing this is because when I go for Guehi and Pickford, it actually does mean that I'm excluding an English midfielder from my draft, just because I think that some of the other alternative options in the midfield can provide potentially the same amount of value there. As far as the German double defense, when you actually look at the group stages, in my opinion, I think Germany just have a really strong group stage for match days 1 and match day 2. It's Hungary and it's Scotland. Scotland obviously have been very strong within their qualification campaign, and we have a couple of players, of course, within the Scotland squad who've actually performed quite well on a domestic level too. So, of course, you can make the argument that they'll probably score versus Germany. But actually, when you look at the clean sheet predictions, they're very good for Germany, whether it's market odds, whether it's the betting lines, as I said, on for example, some sites that I've seen. And then also, for example, my friend 1105's predictions for clean sheets. They all tend to seem to be very high on Germany. And part of that, too, as I said, is because we're not trying to evaluate these teams based on objectively how good they are defensively. I think you can argue, as I said, that England is the best defense in Europe. But do they actually have the best defensive fixtures within the group stage? I think not by a standout amount, but you could still very much argue that they are going to get the best amount of clean sheets within the group stage. I think that's totally fine because that's how strong this English team is anyways. But going back to Germany, because the fixtures are actually quite nice, I do like the idea of going double German defense. And part of that too is, when we create a fantasy draft, I think part of it too is also how efficient some sort of price points are, right? We have access to English defenders, German defenders at 4 million, 4.5 million. It's extremely hard to pass up this opportunity to take that sort of punt. And because you don't really hopefully need to transfer out any of these players, you're also sort of preventing yourself from having to sort of execute additional free transfers in the future. As far as DeMarco, he's obviously a player that I'm specifically picking to target match day 1. And if there's ever going to be a chance where I can use a free transfer, that will be in match day 2 instead, where I can probably replace DeMarco with another player who's actually facing a much easier team, a much easier opponent. And Croatia versus Albania might exactly be that, because just simply moving DeMarco to a Croatian defender could actually allow me to once again target Albania, depending on how we sort of see them play versus Italy, given that we actually think that Albania unfortunately are one of the worst teams heading towards the tournament. As far as my 5th defender spot, this is a weird one here. I think this is actually a placeholder for De Kuipers here from Belgium. Sorry, of course, if I've butchered his name. I will find out soon how to pronounce that. But I have effectively a 4 million defender in Wout Faes here from Leicester and 0.5 million in the bank to upgrade hopefully towards De Kuipers, who would be playing, that fullback position for Belgium on the left-hand side. So those are my kind of thoughts right now on match day 1. I do like the idea of targeting Belgium because I think ultimately when it comes to their group stage and their group, they have an extremely easy group, despite us probably not rating Belgium towards the sort of same level as an England, a France, or even maybe you could argue a Germany. So that's my thoughts on how I'm lining up my defense. A lot of people are going to look at this defense and say, what about Virgil van Dijk? What about Frimpong? What about some other players, like, for example, your Portuguese defenders like Cancelo? And to be honest, I think all of these players are great. When you look at my cheat sheet, you can clearly see that I rate these players. However, as I said, because I'm going for a specific strategy here of trying to target both match day 1 and match day 2, when I actually look at match day 1, I still think the Italian defensive punt is better than, for example, maybe let's say a Danish punt, or even, for example, a punt from a different nation and team. So that's why I really like the DeMarco spot, because I think that I'll probably transfer that player into another punt match day 2, whereas the Belgium defender, in my opinion, is just going to be a very, very strong, resolute pick. If I go for a Dutch defender as well, it's possible that I have to spend another transfer on a Dutch defender. And even though we do have free transfers in the group stages, which is lovely, I still want to make sure that my team is as robust as possible. So that's why I've gone here with this sort of De Kuiper placeholder for now, because I don't actually know what his price is. I'm hoping at best he's going to be 4.5 million. If it's actually the case that he's more than 4.5 million and he's, let's say, price matched to, let's say, Castagna from 5 million, then I think what I'll have to do is probably change my strategy around, and I'll have to probably take Kane out of my team, go towards Cristiano Ronaldo, and then invest into a 5.5 million defender. That's something I'm thinking of doing, because I do think that the drop off from Kane to Ronaldo is probably still worth the 1 million. The question, of course, is whether you want to do that or whether you need to do that. And for now, I don't think either is the case. As far as my defense, rounding it off, it's Lunin, Andre Lunin. Some people actually think that Trubin is the starting goalkeeper for Ukraine. I don't think we've had that confirmation. And yes, of course, Trubin just played the last friendly. But keep in mind, of course, that Lunin was involved in the celebrations with Real Madrid as well. And I think Lunin also played the last two previous almost qualification games for Ukraine. So within the last two competitive games that Ukraine has played, we've seen Lunin actually play ahead of Trubin as the number one goalkeeper. So we'll obviously monitor that development. Doesn't really mean much, to be honest, for the case of this tournament, but I am starting here with Lunin. In the midfield, I'm actually going with De Bruyne, Gundogan, Rodri, Fernandes, and Jorginho. One thing that I think I definitely missed on my first draft is the price of Jorginho. Now, a lot of people will say he's missed the last 4 penalties for Italy and he's definitely off penalties, but actually, it's quite hard to tell who will be on penalties for Italy. One thing I'll mention is that Scamacca is very likely to start for Italy, in my opinion, still, based on the predictions that I've seen and some people that I trust in talking about the Italian team for. And he actually has a 6-0 penalty record, so he's 100% effectively within a small sample size for penalties. He might be the only player within this Italian team who can actually depose Jorginho from penalties. Because if you look at Chiesa, for example, he's 2 out of 3. So that's a pretty poor record and also a small sample size. As far as other players in the squad who would usually take penalties, so your Immobiles of the world, your Berardis of the world, they're not a part of the squad. So actually, it seems very likely that Jorginho could keep penalties. Unless, of course, the coach has other plans. And actually, when I looked back at a September 2023 interview with Spalletti, it actually seemed like Jorginho was still on penalties. So for me, as long as Jorginho is still on penalties, I think that he's going to be a decent placeholder and an enabler at 5 million. And at the end of the day, he's 5 million. You can't really go too far wrong with a cheap player like that. Obviously, we've got some 4.5 million midfielders as well, but I'm happy to pass on them just because we could get a good juicy haul from a 5 million price midfielder in Matchday 1. Why not take that chance? Bruno Fernandes, De Bruyne, I think it's very hard to actually ignore them from our drafts now, particularly because I've actually moved towards a double English defense. It gives me the opportunity to go for De Bruyne. And going back to the whole argument about Saka, Foden, these sorts of players, even Trossard, for example, arguably the minutes of these players who are, just about close to that sort of premium price point is still, in my opinion, not good enough, right? De Bruyne for me should be able to confirm the minutes that I want from a premium player, and I think De Bruyne will give that to me. The alternative, of course, is I go for someone like Bellingham. So let's say if I find out that, FaZe is starting as well, and maybe I can replace, I don't know, for example, a Guehi with a FaZe, I could do that. Or, for example, I could go maybe out of Pickford into another cheaper goalkeeper, and then I can therefore, spend a little bit more money within the game. I suppose I could do that as well, but for now, I still think I'd prefer De Bruyne over Bellingham. As I said, from a tactical point of view as well, I don't think Bellingham has been that integrated in the English team. However, of course, you do want to take you do want to take punts on players that you think will also, for example, sort of take their performance for the national team up to another level in this tournament. Jude obviously is very much capable of doing that. With Gundogan, I think it comes down to the case where as long as he's ready to start for match day 1 and he's going to be in that starting team for Germany, he's going to be a part of my team. I just think that his price point is still ridiculous. We now see him playing much more advanced, and it's very clear that I think either Kroos or Gross will be playing within the central midfield positions, and that allows Gundogan to play further forward. However, of course, the flip side of that is that Gundogan might be an earlier substitute. We've seen actually under Nagelsmann a couple times now, small sample size, of course, that when he's been playing in this sort of advanced midfield position, it quote unquote the Man City position for Gundogan, we have seen that he gets subbed off a little bit early. Now, I don't think I'd, for example, take too much of that into account, because at the end of the day, you're still looking at a player who, probably has access to penalties, and second of all, is just at a ridiculous price point at 7 million. It's kind of hard to pass up on him as an option. The alternative, of course, is simply going for someone like Szoboszlai or another 6.5 midfielder like Shaqiri. In terms of the 6.5 midfielders, though, quickly switching gears to that, I've got Rodri in my team. Now, full disclosure, I do think that Shaqiri, when it comes to goal involvement, and for example, him staying on penalties, is super significant, right? If we're talking about teams that actually have better fixtures within Matchday 1 and Matchday 2, Shaqiri has that. And I think Shaqiri over Rodri is a very justifiable question that a lot of people can ask when they're looking at my draft. And all I have to say to that is I'm Spanish. No, I'm kidding. But The main reason why I'm going for Rodri is, first of all, I do think that the ball recovery aspect of the game is very important. And I do think that when you look at, for example, any of the midfielders within world football who actually have consistent ball recoveries, it's Rodri. He actually usually averages at least 7 per game, whether it's for Spain, whether it's for Man City, usually between 7 to 8, which means a guaranteed access to an additional 2 points. He is, in my opinion, the penalty taker for Spain. So for me, that's another very significant element that sort of matches up to Shaqiri's penalty taking. As far as obviously an open play, you can argue Rodri will play in much less advanced positions. He's playing versus much tougher opponents, and that's very significant too. What I do think is interesting is that I do think that the chances for Rodri to do well, to get man of the match, are also equally high. And I have to be honest, that 5 to 10% element of me being Spanish is going to make me pick Rodri. So unfortunately, I'm going to bench or exclude Shaqiri from my squad. But I think if you're a logical person, you might want to actually, get invested into the Shaqiri business if you want to, because the fixtures are there for Switzerland. As far as Fernandes, as I said, he's a staple of the team. So is De Bruyne. Nothing really to talk about there. And then the front line, same situation as well. Lukaku, Kane, and Mbappe, this is the exact same front line I debuted with in my first draft. I'm still happy with it. As I said, though, I do think dropping Kane to Ronaldo to get you the additional 1 million within Euro Fantasy 2024 can be very lucrative. The position, of course, that looks poor on my team is that Wout phase position where I have 0.5 million as a placeholder for the Kuipers or the Kuipers. And I will find out obviously how to pronounce that. But for the purposes of this video, dropping Kane to Ronaldo and then actually spending an additional 1 million to get, let's say, someone like Frimpong can be quite interesting for my draft. And I will consider that variation as well. So do let me know what your thoughts are on my draft. Do you think I should drop Kane to Ronaldo? Are there any other changes you'd make? I know a lot of people do really like Eriksen as well when it comes to the midfield. At 7 million, 6.5 million, I think we have a lot of options. As I said, Szoboszlai, Shaqiri, Eriksen, these are all players who play very significant roles for their national teams. It comes down to, of course, whether you rate, for example, the strength, I suppose, of Germany over the individual sort of talismanic aspects of players like Eriksen, Szoboszlai, etc. And I think there's no necessarily right answer because, of course, we can see huge aberrations, like, for example, Germany absolutely destroying Scotland 5-0, and that can happen, right? We've seen that happen before, for example, when Spain, demolished Costa Rica. And at the same time, you can also see games where, let's say, Spain will underperform and have a poor result versus a team like Japan. And obviously, no disrespect to Japan, but you can argue that, let's say, the Denmarks of the world are of a similar sort of position to a sort of international stature of Japan. So when it comes down to that, you might want the main man like Eriksen playing as a 10, and that could be significant. For me right now, I'm sort of trusting, I suppose, the strength of certain teams, and particularly the aspect where you don't have to transfer, let's say, hopefully, a Gundogan, where he'll be playing Matchday 1 and Matchday 2 for Germany. But those are my thoughts on my latest draft. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.